Daytona Beach, Florida, Saturday, May 9th, 1992, just before 2 a.m. After a long Friday night at Taco Bell, 19-year-old Gary Robinson was mopping the floor of the fast food restaurant. Gary's manager, Kim Gordon, wanted Gary to mop the floor because he was new, and she wanted to make sure new employees got lots of practice mopping the floors, since so many of them didn't do it properly. Meanwhile, Gary's and Kim's co-workers, 16-year-old Derek Mason and 17-year-old Michelle Van Ness, were walking out behind the restaurant through the rear parking lot. They were headed to the trash dumpster, each carrying 2 large bags of Friday night's trash. The pair were not startled, but were certainly aware of a rust-colored station wagon parked and idling right next to the dumpster. As they walked past the car, Derek and Michelle looked in through the windshield at a young man in the driver's seat, alone in the car, smoking a cigarette. The young man nodded at Michelle, and she smiled back. Just as Derek lifted the lid to the dumpster, 2 teenaged boys appeared from around the corners of the dumpster, one on each side, flanking the employees. Both teens wore surgical gloves. One teen carried a .32 caliber pistol and pointed it directly at Derek's face as the other teen menaced Michelle with a knife. Terrified, Michelle froze. Derek recognized one of the teens as a former Taco Bell employee who'd been let go for a no-call, no-show months earlier. The former employee, the one carrying the knife, saw the recognition in Derek's eyes and put a palm over Derek's face, shoving his head backwards. The other teen, the one wielding the pistol, barked orders at the frightened employees, demanding that they walk back inside the Taco Bell in a single-file line. Michelle first, Derek next, and the gun-wielding teen behind Derek with his pistol pressed into the small of Derek's back. Behind the gunman came the former employee, carrying the knife and what appeared to be rope or twine. As Michelle led the way back to the restaurant, she looked again through the windshield of the station wagon. The young man in the car took a long drag on his cigarette and nodded her way.
And where's everybody now?
2 of them are still in the cooler. One of them looks like he's dead.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dark Dark World. It's me, Jordan Crittenden. Today's episode was going to be about a guy they called the Taco Bell Strangler. And I had done all my research and was writing out my script when I went to Google something about the guy. And as I did, one of the results that came up was a podcast that had just been released like 4 or 5 days ago about that very guy. And I was like, ugh, I don't like to put out a podcast episode when another podcast has just done the same topic really recently. And I wanted to get an episode put out relatively quickly, so I decided to stick with what I was already sort of focused on and check to see if there were any other Taco Bell related crimes, partially because Taco Bell is my favorite fast food restaurant and is relatively easy to eat at as a vegan. And so I came across the story that I'm bringing you today. It takes place in 1992, and I think the first time I ate at a Taco Bell was 1990. Not sure why that's relevant, but basically this happened right around the time that I was, even though that Taco Bell even came onto my radar, so I found it interesting. Maybe down the line I will do my episode on the Taco Bell Strangler because that's an interesting story too. It really has nothing to do with Taco Bell. I won't give it away, but maybe that'll be an episode in the future. Also, shout out to the Fruit Loops podcast who were the podcast that just released their episode on the Taco Bell Strangler. If you're interested in that, go check out Fruit Loops podcast. As for this podcast, today's episode will tell the story of the Daytona Beach Taco Bell robbery in 1992. 18-year-old Kim Gordon had been working at the Taco Bell in Daytona Beach, Florida, for a couple of years. Working as a shift manager on Saturday, May 9th, 1992, just before 2 a.m., Kim sat in the restaurant's office, counting money and credit card receipts from a fairly uneventful Friday night. As Kim looked out the office door to check to make sure the restaurant's newest employee, Gary Robinson, was mopping the floors correctly, she saw Gary's mop lying on the floor. Annoyed, Kim got up and walked out of the office, intent on scolding Gary for avoiding his task. But as she rounded the corner to the main kitchen, she saw Gary with his hands up in the air. Kim arrived in time to see her coworker Derek as he was shoved from behind and into Gary. Kim turned to see a determined, long-haired teenager with a pistol pointed at Derek and Gary. The teen turned to Kim and pointed the pistol at her. He explained to Kim and to the others that this was a robbery and that if everyone cooperated, everyone would go home, unharmed. The young gunman looked back and forth between Gary and Derek and Kim as he spoke, his pistol following his gaze. He explained to Kim that after her coworkers were contained, she would unlock the safe for him and give him whatever cash was inside of it. Kim was surprised that the gunman knew she was the manager, that she had the keys to the safe. Kim nodded in agreement, and as the young gunman spoke, she heard the shaky sobs of her coworker, Michelle. Kim looked to see Michelle enter the kitchen along with another teenaged boy. This boy Kim recognized. He was Anthony Farina, a former employee at the Taco Bell, and he was grinning and threatening Michelle with a knife. Michelle was scared. She was crying and holding her arms, cowering away from Anthony. Anthony and the young gunman rounded up the 4 employees and moved them to the walk-in freezer. The young gunman kept his weapon pointed at the workers, as Anthony tied the hands of Gary, Derek, and Michelle behind their backs and sat them down inside the walk-in freezer. Anthony then stepped out of the freezer and shut the door behind him. The young gunman marched Kim toward the restaurant office, while Anthony remained to keep an eye on Derek, Michelle, and Gary, or at least to keep an eye on the door they were locked behind. Kim led the long-haired young gunman into the restaurant office, where she carefully sat down in the rolling desk chair and bent down toward the safe. The gunman stopped her. He put his hand on her shoulder and tapped his gun on the desk in front of them. He smiled and nodded toward the stacks of cash that Kim had already had out on the desk for counting. Kim swallowed hard. She had forgotten there was money on the desk, and she didn't want the gunman to think she was deliberately trying to subvert his robbery. She wanted to cooperate. She wanted this to be over. She wanted this to be a dream. She wanted to go home. Kim picked up the stacks of bills on the desk. Her hands were shaking now, and she realized the gunman hadn't given her anything to put the cash inside. She told him she needed something to put the cash in, and again he put his hand on her shoulder, this time as if to calm her. Smiling and making eye contact with Kim, the young gunman called out to Anthony Farina and told him to bring a bag into the office. Soon Anthony came into the office with a plastic Taco Bell takeout bag. The young gunman looked at Anthony as if to ask, "Really?" Anthony shrugged as if to say, "All they got." The young gunman nodded Anthony back toward the freezer and turned his attention back to Kim. He dropped the bag onto the desk and nodded to Kim to put the stacks of cash inside the bag. When Kim finished with the cash on the desk, the gunman nudged the safe with his foot. Kim bent down and unlocked the safe. She was worried that the gunman might become annoyed when he realized that not much cash would be left inside the safe. The day shift manager had already deposited the cash from Thursday night and Friday morning. There wasn't much left, but for a few stacks of bills from the late Friday afternoon transactions. The Friday night cash had all been on the desk. When the door to the safe opened, the young gunman took the takeout bag from the desk and crouched down to look into the safe. To Kim's relief, he didn't seem at all disappointed with the amount of money in the safe. He didn't seem to care about it at all. He grabbed the few stacks of cash and dropped them into the Taco Bell bag. He stood up and told Kim to do the same. Kim stood up and obeyed when the young gunman nodded to her to walk back to the freezer. As Kim walked, the gunman told her to relax and that no one was going to get hurt. This would all be over soon. Kim wanted this to be over. She just wanted to go home. When Kim got to the freezer door was open again, and Anthony Farina was leaning up against it with his left arm, his head resting on his left forearm. In his right hand, he held the knife, and on his face, he held his menacing grin. Kim could see Michelle, Derek, and Gary on the floor of the freezer, all seated back to back with their legs crossed. Their hands had been tied behind their backs with the twine that Anthony carried, and they were all shivering now from the cold and from the fear. Michelle was crying, breathing hard, almost hyperventilating. As Kim noticed this, she began to feel her own hands being tied together behind her back. She was pressed down onto her knees and told to go and sit with her co-workers, with her back to their backs. Anthony Farina spoke now. He explained to the employees that he and his partner would not close the freezer door again. He explained that the workers were being kept there on the freezer floor with their hands tied, simply to allow the thieves to get some extra distance from the restaurant before the police were called. Yet as Anthony spoke, the young gunman, no longer smiling, walked straight into the freezer and shot Derek Mason in the face. Derek fell over on his side as Michelle screamed, and the young gunman stepped to Gary Robinson and shot him in the chest. Kim closed her eyes as tightly as she could. She tried to wish it all away. She just wanted to go home. The young gunman now stood over Michelle Van Ness. He took a moment to examine Michelle. He gazed down at her like a deity, regarding her suffering. Then he shrugged and shot Michelle in the head. He stepped in front of Kim Gordon. Kim kept her eyes shut. She heard a click. Then she heard another click. Then another. She opened her eyes. The young gunman's pistol had jammed. It was broken. It wouldn't fire. A fleeting relief washed over Kim. She welcomed the quiet warmth of this small bit of good fortune. But then, she watched as Anthony Farina stepped inside the freezer and handed his knife to the young gunman. The young gunman looked at Anthony and then at the knife. He took the knife into his hand. He examined it, felt the weight of it in his palm. He looked at Kim, and he smiled again. Anthony crouched down and grabbed Kim's head. Kim began to scream. Anthony pulled Kim's head into his chest, exposing her back to the young gunman. The young gunman plunged the blade of the knife into Kim's back, and she screamed again. In fact, she hadn't stopped screaming. Again, the knife plunged into her back, and then again, this time into her neck. Kim stopped screaming, and her body went limp in Anthony Farina's arms. Anthony let her body fall to the floor. He stood up and looked into the eyes of the young gunman, his little brother, Jeffrey Farina. The brothers picked up their weapons and their bag of cash and ran out of the restaurant. The brothers rushed out into the parking lot toward the trash dumpster, where their getaway car was idling. 23-year-old John Henderson sat in the driver's seat smoking cigarettes and smiled widely as he saw the two brothers emerge from the restaurant. Henderson laughed as the brothers hopped into the station wagon. He put the car in drive and peeled out of the parking lot. At the end of his third ever shift, Working at the Taco Bell in Daytona Beach, 19-year-old Gary Robinson crawled out of the walk-in freezer where he had just been shot in the chest. He was soaked in blood. Some of the blood was his. Some of it belonged to Michelle, some to Derek, and some to his manager, Kim. As Gary pulled himself along the tiled floor of the restaurant, he worried that the severe pain he was feeling might mean he wouldn't make it to the telephone he was heading toward. Gary did make it to the phone, though, and upon reaching it, he dialed 911.
911, what's the emergency?
We've been robbed. We've all been shot. We need an ambulance right away. And police.
How long ago this happened?
About 10 minutes. Everybody's been shot. Hurry up.
What's your name?
Gary.
How many people?
4.
Where were they shot?
I was shot in the chest. One in the mouth, one in the head, one stabbed in the back of the neck.
This is the Taco Bell?
Yes.
And who these people were?
I don't know who they were, but I can describe them.
Are you an employee?
Yeah.
Okay, what would the suspects look like?
Man. Both of them were kind of tall. One of them was dark-haired.
Were they white males, black males?
White male. I don't know how much I can talk. It was shot like in the heart side.
And this happened 10 minutes ago?
Yeah.
And where's everybody now?
2 of them are still in the cooler. One of them looks like he's dead.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God.
In the late morning of Saturday, May 9th, 1992, the 4 Taco Bell employees who had been working the Friday night shift in Daytona Beach lay in hospital beds. All were in serious condition, but Gary Robinson, who had been shot in the chest, was in critical condition. Michelle Van Ness had it even worse. She had been shot in the head and was only alive now by the grace of machines, which were doing the work of living for her. The doctors explained to Michelle's family that Michelle would be in a vegetative state for the rest of her life. The length of the rest of her life would be determined by how long her family was willing to let the life support machines do Michelle's living for her. Before he went into surgery, Derek Mason had told police detectives that one of the perpetrators of the crime had been former Taco Bell employee Anthony Farina. The detectives reached out to other Taco Bell employees to find out if any of them could help to track down Anthony and his brother Jeffrey. One Taco Bell worker claimed that she had heard the brothers were staying in motels around Daytona Beach and in neighboring Holly Hill. The detectives called around to motels in the area and discovered that the brothers were registered at Raleigh's Court Motel on Ridgewood Avenue in Holly Hill. Police headed to the motel, but before they arrived, they were alerted to a 911 call from another Taco Bell employee that had come in reporting that the Farina brothers had been spotted getting gas at a gas station right next to Raleigh's Court Motel. Daytona Beach and Holly Hill police swarmed the gas station. Anthony Farina was inside the gas station store, while Jeffrey Farina and John Henderson sat in Henderson's station wagon at one of the gas pumps. All 3 of the young men were arrested on the spot. They were charged with armed robbery and attempted murder. However, these charges would be amended the following day when Michelle Van Ness, the 17-year-old Taco Bell employee who had dreamed of becoming a pediatrician and who had been shot in the head by Jeffrey Farina, was taken off of her life support and pronounced dead on Mother's Day, Sunday, May 10th, 1992. Despite his being just shy of 17 years old himself, the state of Florida decided to prosecute Jeffrey Farina as an adult. He and the other 2 offenders were all charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. All 3 of the young men were facing the death penalty, but getaway driver John Henderson cut a deal with the prosecution and agreed to testify against the Farina brothers in exchange for a sentence of life in prison. The Farina brothers were tried together, and at their trial, the jury heard the testimony of John Henderson, as well as the testimony of an inmate who had shared a cell with Jeffrey Farina after Jeffrey's arrest. This inmate testified that Jeffrey Farina had told him that the reason he had robbed the Taco Bell and attacked the young workers was because he was bored. The jury also heard an audio recording of a conversation between the Farina brothers that occurred as they sat together in a police squad car after their arrest at the Holly Hill gas station. In this recording, the brothers laughed about their crimes and made several damning statements. Jeffrey Farina complained that the brothers should have worn masks, while Anthony Farina stated that they should have cut the throats of all of the employees to ensure that the brothers wouldn't be identified. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and returned guilty verdicts with majority votes in favor of the death penalty for both brothers. At that time, in the state of Florida, a majority vote was all that was needed for a death sentence. However, in the coming years, both Farina brothers would have their death sentences overturned through process of appeal. Eventually, the prosecution gave Anthony Farina a sentence of life in prison in exchange for Anthony's agreement to stop making appeals. The case of Jeffrey Farina was different. Twice in the coming years, the 3 surviving victims of the Taco Bell attack would appear in court, along with the family of Michelle Van Ness, to testify against Jeffrey Farina as he tried to appeal his death sentence. The first time, Jeffrey Farina's appeal was denied, and his death sentence remained. However, 26 years after he had committed his crimes, the Supreme Court ruled that sentencing juveniles to death was cruel and unusual punishment, and this ruling caused Jeffrey Farina's death sentence to be overturned in favor of a sentence of life in prison. Here is the father of Michelle Van Ness.
We've had to go through this 3 times, and each time it rips your heart out. That guy destroyed my family. And we're not the same. We never will be. To say that I'm happy with life in prison? No. Twice juries in this community have heard the facts. And twice they have said, this guy is so deplorable, so irredeemable, he ought to be sentenced to death. The only thing that saved him is judicial activism by the courts that have said, you know what, 16, you're too young to die. Well, guess what? He was 6 or 7 months younger than my daughter. Where's the justice? Where's the justice for my Michelle?
Prosecutors were able to argue that because Jeffrey Farina was tried and convicted as an adult, his case didn't apply to the Supreme Court ruling. Jeffrey Farina is now 42 years old and sits on death row at Hardy Correctional Institution in Bowling Green, Florida. His death sentence is eligible for review in 2027. John Henderson, now 49 years old, is serving his life sentence at Dade Correctional Institution in South Florida. Anthony Farina, now 44 years old, is serving his life sentence in Columbia Correctional Institution in Lake City, Florida. On the night of the Taco Bell robbery in the spring of 1992, John Henderson and the Farina brothers made off with a total of $2,158. So that'll do it for today's episode. Sort of a random one, but I found it interesting. I hope that you did also. It's always sort of terrified me that there are people out there that just don't seem to care about other people and are capable of doing these heinous things without really feeling much about it. They don't seem to have remorse. They seem to be able to do these things without really having any sort of, without thinking about the crime as being anything different than just, eating a bowl of cereal or going to the bathroom or something. And those people have always frightened me, and Jeffrey Farina certainly seems like one of those people. But he was just so young when he did this. And his brother. His brother was 18, Jeffrey was 16, and it's just so young to imagine. I mean, first of all, I'm personally against the death penalty, but even to just imagine these guys being in prison for the rest of their lives. I mean, I guess they deserve it. I mean, what are you going to do? But I can't help but think that there's got to be some better way to work with these people and try to come up with some sort of solution for these types of crimes, whether that be behavioral help or, mental institution, something other than just being behind bars for the rest of your life and getting to talk to a prison psychologist once a week or the chaplain once a week, something like that. It's a flawed system. Let me know your thoughts. Hit me up on the social medias or send me an email at darkworldpod@gmail.com. If you're not interested in spending money, the best way that you can support the show is to just tell all of your friends about it and let people know that it exists and that they should listen to it if they're interested in true crime. And other than that, writing a review, talking about how much you love the show, and giving it 5 stars, also very helpful and a great way to show support. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back in 10 to 14 days, something like that. See ya!